Hello. Today we're talking about stelliums through the houses, what it means as far as the person's personality or character goes, to have a stellium in each of the 12 houses. So one of the things I'll say about this is that anytime one aspect, one area of the chart is very heavily visible, is very prominent, um, an opposite complementary effect can happen where the opposite sign and the opposite house actually manifests. So we can see this in signs. So look at, Taurus and Scorpio, they're opposite. That's not to say that they're really that much different. They share a duplicity. They're both, yin or introverted signs. But whereas, Taurus can be very possessive, Scorpio can be very obsessive, and the behaviors that result from that can be very similar, even exactly the same in appearance. So the same is true of houses. If you have a lot of emphasis on the first house, which deals with the self, that person can actually come off seeming very seventh housey, whereas we might think that they're really independent and grounded within their own identity. They can actually require a lot of attention and always need to be in a relationship and have codependent tendencies, which is usually thought of as more of a seventh house thing because the seventh house deals with marriage and partnership and whatnot. It's very other oriented. Okay, so that's how everything works in the chart wheel, which is why I use a wheel to display birth charts and to do astrological work, is because you see the polarities between everything, between the signs, between the houses. And I often see that a lot of my clients actually have high concentrations in particular areas of the chart, which means that there's not enough conscious attention on those other parts of the chart. And we all have energy from all the signs and all the houses affecting us in one way or another. The areas where you have birth planets just indicate the more conscious areas of focus in our lives and in our perceptions. Okay. So that's the first thing I'll say, because when we're dealing with a stellium, we're dealing with a high concentration of conscious energy in one place of the chart. Okay. It's 3 or more planets, usually in the same sign and in the same house, but at the very least in a cluster in one part of the chart. So there's a lot of debate over what constitutes a stellium. Is it 3 planets? Is it 4 planets? What are the orb allowances between each of the conjunctions within the stellium? My answer is that it depends. Okay. The more personal the planets are, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, the fewer planets are allowed. So you can have, a concentration of 3 personal planets. The 3 most common to be in the same place at the same time would be Sun, Mercury, and Venus. From our perspective here on Earth, Mercury and Venus never move that far away from the Sun because they exist between Earth and the Sun, right? So they're always in side-by-side signs. Venus no more than 2 signs away from the Sun at any given time. Okay. So remember, your birth chart is calculated from a geocentric position. Astrology is a geocentric system. It's about here on Earth, our perspective, the location of your birth at the time of your birth and the planetary alignments from that perspective. That's your birth chart. That's your set of perceptions and predispositions, not anyone else's. It's not anybody else's problem. Okay. That's your problem to deal with. Your chart is your problem. Okay. So yes, 3 planets can constitute a stellium. If it's Sun, Moon, and Venus, that's a stellium, man. All right. You can't have any more than 1 outer planet in a 3-planet stellium for it to be considered a stellium. Okay. It's just a pair of conjunctions, we'll say. And that's what a stellium is. It's a combination of multiple conjunctions, 2 or more conjunctions. So generally speaking, we don't consider 2 planets in the same part of the chart a conjunction unless they're within a 10-degree orb of each other. So they have to be, 10 degrees or less from each other. That's a conjunction. So if you have 2 personal planets, 1 outer planet, angle also, an angle can take the place of one of those personal planets if the outer planet in question is actually Jupiter or Saturn. Okay, so those are middle planets, Jupiter and Saturn. We can see them. They're conscious to us. We can see them with the naked eye on any given night, as long as the sky is clear enough. And they do have a pretty conscious effect on the personality. All right. And for the outer planets, the closer they are to an angle, the stronger they are, the more significant they are, especially the ascendant and the midheaven. Okay. So if you have, 3 planets, 2 of them are inner planets, one of them is an outer planet, and the other one is an angle, that's definitely a stellium. Okay, because the angle strengthens the planets near it, makes them more prominent, more visible in the person's character. All right. So going on, defining stelliums here. In a 4-planet stellium, there needs to be at least 2 personal planets, and maybe two outer planets works, especially if one of them is a middle planet, Jupiter or Saturn, or one of them is an angle. That works as well. Okay, so and each of the pairings, each of the conjunctions have to be within a 10-degree orb. So there can't be more than 10 degrees between any 2 planets that are involved in the stellium. All right. Talking about a concentration of energy in one place. Once you go beyond 10 degrees, it's still going to be felt if those planets are in the same sign and in the same house, because they're going to be showing up in the same contexts of life. But it's not quite a conjunction, because you're still not going to have the feeling of, oh, when one of them is engaged, the other planet, the other part of my personality is engaged, and I can't separate it. That's what the feeling of a conjunction is like, is that you can't separate these 2 parts of yourself. Okay. 2 planets can be in the same sign and in the same house with a 15-degree orb. That's not really a conjunction, but they're both visible in the person's character in that aspect of life that the house represents. And they carry the same style of personality expression with them, being in the same sign. All right. But there isn't that feeling of inseparability, if that makes sense. That's what constitutes a conjunction. And you get that whenever the planets are in 10-degree orb or less. So I'm going to use my birth chart as an example, because I have 2 different kinds of stelliums, 2 like sort of extreme examples of stelliums that I'm trying to get at here. Also, like, it depends on the aspects as well. If you have a heavily aspected outer planet as part of your 3-planet stellium, and maybe the other 2 points are an inner planet and a mid planet, like, Venus and Jupiter paired with Uranus. And Uranus is a very highly aspected planet in your chart and carries more significance than it would otherwise, because Uranus kind of represents more unconscious things. Then I would consider that a stellium, that particular example, because it means that Uranus itself has a more conscious expression in your character, and therefore is going to affect those other 2 planets, the Venus and the Jupiter, in a more conscious way. All right. So aspects matter, and aspects are really the mediating factor in a lot of ways, in a lot of situations. How heavily a planet is aspected will determine the significance of that planet in your life. because if it's heavily aspected, it's connected to more other parts of you, other planets. All right. So I'll use myself as an example. So this is my chart. I have two different kinds of stelliums. One in the 6th house in Cancer, one in the 12th house in Capricorn, including the ascendant. Okay, so all of the planets involved in both of these stelliums are in the same sign and in the same house, excluding the ascendant in my 12th house stellium, but still in the same sign. So they're all going to be activated when that stellium, when that part of my life is engaged, that part of my personality. So here in the Cancer stellium, we have this is a tight stellium. The whole stellium is within 5 degrees. Okay, all 4 of these planets. There's Sun, Chiron, Mercury, Jupiter. All right. So Chiron is another one of these kind of secondary things. Overall, not quite as strong as an outer planet, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, but it can be depending on how it's aspected and how it's connected to other parts of the chart. So if it's connected to my sun and inner planet Mercury and mid planet Jupiter, and it's part of a, otherwise 3-planet stellium, then it's going to be engaged. My Chiron's going to be engaged when these other planets are, because this whole stellium is aspected to certain other planets, especially like the midheaven and Pluto, right? So Chiron, but Chiron also gets drowned out. The Kazemi effect happens with Chiron, right? So like the wounding aspect of my personality isn't quite as obvious or visible to other people, even though there is a tincture of that involved in anything that my personality and my teaching part of my personality gets involved in. There's also an element of Chiron there. So it makes it both more and less significant depending on the context, right? But this is clearly a stellium because it involves the sun, Mercury, an inner planet, and Jupiter, a middle planet. And then tag on Chiron as a 4th kind of secondary thing. So it's a 4-point stellium, right? And it's tight orb. There's not much separation between them. If you go across the chart to my 12th house Capricorn stellium, it does involve the moon, major inner planet. It involves Saturn, which is pretty heavily aspected to the rest of my chart, and it's my chart ruling planet in its ruling sign on the ascendant, which makes it threefold in strength. It involves the ascendant as well, which is a very visible point of the personality, and 2 inner planets. And it's the inner planets that are kind of tying the moon together with Saturn and the ascendant. But nevertheless, there are no more than 10 degrees of separation between any 2 of these conjunctions. So the widest orb, I believe, is between Neptune and Saturn, and that is a 9-degree orb if you look down on this chart, the aspect chart down here. So this satisfies all the criteria as well. Same sign, same house, no more than 10-degree orb between any 2 of the conjunctions, any 2 of the planets in the stellium, and it involves 5 points, not a mere 3 or even 4. Now, a lot of people born around around the same time that I was, late 80s, early 90s will say, oh, I have a Capricorn stellium or outer planet stellium that involves Saturn and Uranus and Neptune. No, that's not a stellium. Why? Because one of them's a middle planet, Saturn, and the other 2 are outer planets, which alone do not constitute a stellium. So just get that out of your head. You're not that cool. You don't have a stellium in Capricorn, or Sag in Capricorn, or Capricorn in Uranus, depending on which part of that time frame you were born in. Okay. So that's an extensive explanation of what a stellium actually is. So let's talk about stelliums through the houses. Stop sharing screen. So if you have a stellium in the first house, you have a high concentration of energy focused on yourself. People with borderline narcissistic, self-obsessing tendencies, lead singers of bands have this. People will also enter into codependent relationships. And that's just on the negative end, right? But on the positive end, these people can be very confident and very grounded in themselves, and have a public image which is very visible, and they can use that power for good or for evil, right? So to have a stellium in the second house means that you're very concerned with making money. You're quite a sensual person, most likely, and you're concerned with resources and providing for yourself, making something tangible of the structure that you've been given. There's a lot of conscious focus on the second house, on that area of the chart, and what it represents, which is money and resources and support, basic survival needs, which also includes sensory pleasures. Third house, stellium people usually work in media. There's some aspect of talk and communication and technology to their personality and to the things that they do and place focus on. On the positive end, they can really be interested in facts behind bigger picture structures of things, and they can be good at communicating, and they can be good salespeople and be a good proliferator of ideas. But are those ideas true? Depends on what else is going on in the chart. And also, do they know when to stop talking? That's also going to depend on what else is going on in the chart and the sign that these planets are in. Okay. Fourth house is quite a homebody, as you might expect, and someone who's deeply concerned with grounding within the home, within the family, and providing sort of a safe container for themselves and for their loved ones. Probably like to stay in more often than not, and probably work from home if they are career oriented. And they're concerned with origin and legacy, and everything that they do, for the most part, is going to involve leaving behind a positive legacy for themselves and their family. Fifth house stellium people can be quite hedonistic because it's the area of recreation and fun and pleasure. But conversely, the fifth house also involves kids. So they can be hyper focused on providing for their children, or being a good example for children in general. So fifth house is very interesting in that way, isn't it? Because we think of people who live hedonistic lifestyles as people we don't want our kids to go anywhere near, because those people live strictly for themselves. And they can come off kind of immature, again, when taken too far. If you have a stellium in a particular part of the chart, in the fifth house, you can take fun and pleasure too far. You may have addictive tendencies, but it's more about like just the surge of energy that you get from participating in certain things or taking certain substances. It may not have a lasting effect in the long term negatively on your ability to cope with life. So fifth house is about flings and more short-term fun that you can just kind of box in and put to the side and then get back to your life when you need to. But hyper concern with having a good time, and children as well. So there are ups and downs to that, like with anything. Sixth house stellium is very particular about how they do things. very meticulous, quite logical in their approach to solving problems, and can really get hung up on the details sometimes. They're either hyper concerned with their health and their hygiene, or they have a lack of concern for it. So it's like one extreme or the other, and that's, again, what stelliums afford us, is extreme focus or neglect on these areas of life. Okay. So sixth house people may get really irritated by having other people tell them how to do things. It may be difficult people to live with as roommates. But they're very very much filled with a sense of duty. And so they're very likely to express that sense of duty selflessly and do work simply because it needs to be done, not necessarily in order to gain approval from anyone or for any sort of reward. They're satisfied with the work itself. Yeah. So seventh house stellium people are very partnership oriented. This can take a healthy or an unhealthy codependent form, depending on the condition of the planets involved, like with any stellium or any placement, really. They really put a lot of conscious value into collaborating, and they'd rather not go about things alone. They want a sidekick or, a partner, someone by their side, whether it's in relationships or work or life in general. Okay. Probably have a best friend of some sort. And so they're very, very attached to the idea of partnership, and can have trouble accepting that really we are on this life's journey alone by ourselves, and that we have to be able to fend for ourselves. But at the same time, they're massive proponents of the converse truth to that, which is not every trip in life must be taken alone. We always have connections and people that our life paths are crossing with, and at the right, times and in the right places. And so they're very consciously aware of the importance of connection with other people. Eighth house stellium people have to be really careful. There could be some pretty psychotic and obsessive and controlling power-seeking tendencies with these people, because eighth house is about hidden things. It's about hidden psychological motivations and power dynamics and other people's possessions, other people's stuff, other people's money. And so whenever your main concern is other people's stuff and other people's money, that can come from a place of seeking control or power over others, right? So, like, I know Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's she has an eighth house stellium, for example, and it's in Capricorn. So she's very logical and rational about how she gains control over other people. And it's also an area of sex that involves sex. So that theme can play into the power-seeking dynamic of someone who has a lot of energy in the eighth house. Okay. So it can be a good thing, right? Again, depending on the condition of the planets and how those planets are aspected to the rest of the chart, and just what else is going on. You always have to look at the big picture, right? And look at the context of the life as well. Two people with the same exact chart may turn out different if they live in different environments. They have different contexts through which to express those same parts of themselves. So over time, through patterned habit, their characters will develop in different ways. Okay. I'm not saying we're more nurture than nature. That's not true. We're more nature than nurture, actually. And that's what the whole of astrology is based on, is like kind of a form of naturalism in a way. But, with transits and progressions and everything, astrology has means of accounting for the fact that we are not strictly our birth chart, and that things are infinitely fluid, even if we have the same baseline perceptions through our birth chart through time. Different contexts, different things happen to us over the course of our lives, and give us new contexts through which to improve ourselves and do it better this time than last time, So Eighth house people may get locked in, depending on the sign, may get locked into a particular way of doing things. They may get ultra comfortable with the control and the power that they have over their own life and over the lives of other people in their immediate environment. But they also may be the opposite, like ultra change oriented. Say if these planets are an immutable sign, they're obsessed with change and gaining control over new circumstances. Anyway, ninth house stellium. Generally speaking, these people are really interested in traveling. They're really interested in higher learning. They're really interested in philosophy and religion. You see people who lead devout religious lives, having ninth house heavy charts. Also, they could make good teachers. They could make preachers, of various sorts. So ninth house heavy people, stellium in the ninth house is ultra concerned with things of the ninth house, higher learning, may or may not go to grad school, but will pursue at least some alternative higher education, at the very least, at some point in their lives. And they're constantly, learning the concepts, the forest among the trees, we'll say. They're more concerned with the forest, whereas third house heavy people like facts and talking and communicating for its own sake. They're more concerned with the trees themselves within the forest, right? So again, perfect complements. That's the information axis, we'll say. Small details, third house, big picture, concepts, beliefs. Ninth house people, heavy people are always revising their belief system, especially if those planets are not in a fixed sign. 10th house people are very concerned with status. They're very concerned with moving upward toward that midheaven, which is in a quadrant house system. Like I use the cusp of the 10th house, which is the peak of your own personal mountain of achievement that you're aiming toward all the time. It's that public persona role that you're fulfilling anytime you're at work or performing or in a public setting. So people with that 10th house are very concerned with their appearance, kind of like first house heavy people, but more in terms of the status that it affords them rather than the particulars of like, oh, why does my nose look like this? I'm a little insecure about it. They're made less insecure by nitpicky details because, again, we're looking at the top of the chart. It represents more overarching type things, the midheaven. Kind of provides a container sort of light that shines onto the personality whenever things are coming together and aiming toward that peak, So people there are very, who have stelliums in the 10th house are very status oriented. All right. 11th house heavy people, stellium in the 11th house will be really hard to dislike. Again, depending on aspects, depending on the sign, depending on what the overall condition of the planets are. But generally speaking, these people want unity. They want everybody to just get along. And they have a certain demeanor to them that is very open, very accepting, at the very least, very tolerant. They, again, if there are hard aspects and there's a hard aspect to Saturn or something like that, these people may lack principles, lack a backbone. They may be at great risk of being a doormat and being too much of a yes type person, and they may let people walk on them. But for the most part, their intentions are pure. Stellium in the 11th house. It's really not a terrible place to have a stellium, because it makes you very likable, and at least being likable gives you an opportunity, a springboard for doing things that are good and for formulating good principles that work for you and for everyone else as well. Think about what the 11th house represents. It's about humanity in general, your sense of belonging within the greater context of humanity. And so these people have a role to play that's quite conscious because, again, it's 11th house is near the top of the chart as well. So they have a personality you can't quite miss, but it usually takes a warm and fuzzy kind of form. Again, depends on the sign. 12th house heavy people. Well, I have a stellium in the 12th house. I'll actually save that for another video. 12th house stellium. I'll put that in my 12th house series. This 12th house kind of combines everything from the first 11 houses and then adds everything else in the non-material world that we can't know and do not know and will not know. You know, it is the place of the unknown and spirituality and the occult and isolation and the mental processes that ensue whenever you are in isolation. That's why, that's why 12th house is often described as being the place of hospitals and mental asylums and things like that. It's not about those physical places. It's about the mental and spiritual place that you go to when you are in isolation. That's what it's about. Okay. So I'll just say in a sort of overarching way that 12th house stellium people are concerned with that realm of reality, the realm of the unknown, the realm of where the mind and the spirit goes in a person when it is all alone and knows that it can't depend on anyone else for anything, especially as far as like being one's own mental point of origin is concerned, and where you are in your spiritual path, that's very much an isolated position to be in pretty much the entire journey through. So we'll say that 12th house stellium people are concerned with those kinds of things. I hope you enjoyed this video on stelliums and what they are and what it's like, generally speaking, depending on other conditions of the chart, to have stelliums in each of the houses. So hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. Cheers.